Well, welcome everyone to the Q&A. Sarah is here joining me, and we are going to take your questions and we are going to answer them live here. So this is kind of new for me. I have never worked in this format, but I think it's a lot of fun. So as everyone, grabs their cup of coffee, gets in, settles in, make sure to post your questions. And I will be reading as many off as I can. And we'll try to give you the answers on the spot. So Sarah, how do you feel about that? We just got to come up with the answers here.
I'm ready to talk language. I think about it all day and all night, so it's okay.
Well, since that's all you think about and talk about all day, all night, let's just, while people are getting getting all their drinks and getting settled, let's just talk a little bit about the grammar part of it. So I'm just going to be completely forthcoming here. I was not looking forward to teaching the grammar levels 7 and up, especially the high school level. I figured that's going to take me so much time of research and, just making sure I get it right. So God was good, and he provided me with 2 co-authors that absolutely love grammar, and you have written all the grammar lessons at the high school level. So, I'm just going to throw the whole topic of grammar over to you and give us some tips. Give us some ideas on how you would grade grammar in these upper levels, and how do I approach grammar as a parent and not be completely overwhelmed?
Well, that's what you want to do first, is calm down. It's going to be okay. Kids learn grammar mostly really through hearing it spoken properly, hearing good grammar, through reading quality books where they're reading grammar. But also, as you're grading it, it can be a tough thing. Definitely can be challenging in the high school level. You're trying to grade an essay. How deep do you go into correcting the grammar? I would say that the first thing I would do is look for blatant errors. If they're saying something like he don't or it don't, obviously that's a grammatical error. So go through and look for those major errors. Then familiarize yourself with the grammar charts in the back of the book. It's a great way to just go to that back matter and you see all the grammar charts together, review them. It'll help you in your own communication. You'll probably notice, oh my goodness, I just sent out an email and I made that error. So get familiar with it at the high school level, and those charts make it really easy. Then lastly, if you are trying to grade a high school essay, most students are typing those essays. They're typing out their essay, their biography they're writing. Use something like Grammarly. That would assist you. Now, if you go to like the pro level and everything, that's really going to nitpick their grammar. And what you don't want to do to a student is so analyze the grammar that it takes the joy out of what they just wrote. Nobody wants to turn in a paper that they're excited about the thoughts they put down and have their grammar so completely pulled apart that it's discouraging. I have a very reluctant writer, my 11th grader, who's doing level 10 right now. And I am just really focusing on picking out the major things that he's getting wrong with his grammar and letting some of it slide. Sure.
Well, those are all really good points. And I think that will really help our families just approach it in a not so overwhelming way, that we don't have to correct every little thing and be afraid of it. And I think that's probably the best thing for all of us to keep in mind, that our students are going to gradually get better. So let's jump over. I believe it was Ashley, had a question that we didn't have time to give a written answer to. So we're going to go ahead and read that and give her an answer. So let me read that. Extremely reluctant reader. Went to private parochial school for 4 years. Still 4 years later, she is still very reluctant. We go to the library weekly, as older sister loves to read, but have not been able to create excitement about learning topics of choice. So, ninth to 12th grade literally sounds challenging. How do you encourage reluctant readers to understand the amazing world that's exposed in reading quality books and literature?
The first thing I would do, I mean, I'm not quite sure how old your child is, but I would do read alouds. I pick really quality read aloud books, and my boys and I start every morning with a read aloud. You can make it fun. Maybe it's the type of student who would love to build a little tent in the living room, and you can just sit in there and read a couple chapters of a book to them. And they can begin to realize, wow, we were transported to another place. They get to use their imagination. They get to have some fun with mom. Like, that's something that could really encourage their reading. Also, sometimes it's just that the books we're giving them, maybe the reading level is just a little bit too high. And then it becomes work instead of enjoyment. So considering maybe getting some books that are slightly below what you think their reading level is, but they'd still be interesting, that's where I would start.
Yeah, I think that those are really great tips. The other thing that I like to remind families, I read constantly. I was always trying, I would go to the library, find books. I read like crazy, and I read for pleasure. Nobody had to tell me or assign me books. I read all the assigned books, and then I read a whole stack more. Well, that's the way God designed me. We are fearfully and we are wonderfully made. Now, at this juncture in life, Randy does more reading for pleasure than I do. But he likes to read books that he can get good information from. He's not inclined to pick up a good novel, where if I'm going to read, the problem that I have is if I'm going to read, I'm just going to keep reading and leave all other parts of life, undone. And so it's harder for me to actually find the time to read because I love it so much. But we have to recognize that not every kid has to absolutely love reading. We just need them to gain the skill so that as an adult, they can go and they can have conversations with people about books, that they understand the topics that are found in them. They can have intelligent discussions. And then if they want to read, that they have a familiarity of the different genres, how to critique what they're reading, those sorts of skills. And so we have to look at the bigger picture and understand that we may not have all of our children may not just love to read, and that's okay, because God made us all different, and they can be perfectly successful in life without having this love for grabbing big novels and dissecting them. So
yeah,
just
exactly.
a little reminder out there.
From what I remember of Randy, he was not an avid reader as a kid or a high school student, was not interested.
He was not.
He's now an avid reader. Right?
Yes. So, and I get all the bills for all of his audiobooks, and I can tell you he reads a lot, at least does the audiobooks. He does go to bookstores too. I can't tell you how many times I've actually sat in the car waiting for him while he's in a bookstore.
Yeah.
So, God will shape and mold them in the way he wants them to go. So don't be too discouraged if your kid isn't, an avid reader. It's really okay.
Yes.
Okay, Stacy says, my question is about levels 11 and 12. You were seeing excerpts. I think it was supposed to be you were saying excerpts. Are all of the author's worldview biblical, or are all of the answers taken from physical statements? I love how Masterbooks brings everything to the Lord. I'm going to let you dive into that, Sarah. Some of the excerpts I used and some you used, but you're the last one to be using excerpts. So I'll let you answer that one.
Yeah, I can speak for level 11 at least. The excerpts I'm choosing for worldview and literary analysis days all have to do with analyzing like the character traits. There's usually themes like perseverance, faithfulness, loyalty. So we're looking at all sorts of literature based on those character traits. Also, some literary devices are taught in there as well. If there's anything that is of any sort of a questionable worldview or a character maybe lies to get out of a situation, that is always discussed and brought up in light of what the Bible teaches about those things. So yes, not all the sources are necessarily a Christian story per se, but biblical worldview is applied to all of it.
And I would also say that many of the books, I should say most of the books, are actually masterbooks titles. However, that doesn't mean that every single one of those books we would recommend their student grab off the shelf and read. We would advise that the parent pre-read those books to make sure that it's appropriate for their particular student.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so Beth says, can you jump into 10th grade without losing any foundation?
I'm assuming she might be meaning jumping from level 8 to 10, or maybe she was jumping from another curriculum. I don't believe so. I think that, if your student has done any other curriculum through 9th grade, I think they can easily jump into level 10. I mean, most of the grammar concepts that are gone over in any type of course is pretty standard. So they would have learned what they need to know by the time they would take level 10. I believe that, I start with the foundation of very, very simple grammar concepts and build that up. So
you're saying they should be able to jump into it without losing any foundation?
Yeah.
Okay. And I would also say to look at the previews, look at level 9, look at level 10, go on to that Masterbooks website, compare the previews and see which level is the best for your student.
Yes.
Okay. Tanya says, hi, is it easy for a student to follow the old English style of writing in Pilgrim's Progress if they haven't previously read historical or classical literature? I love this curriculum, and I'm trying to determine if my 8th grader will be ready for this next year.
What I did with my kids personally was I read them Little Pilgrim's Progress before they read the Old English version, just to give them a frame of reference, just context, to understand the basics of the story before diving into the Old English. And Kristen does a great job with that, with Pilgrim's Progress, pulling out the vocabulary and literary analysis to help the students understand all those concepts. So I think if on day one they really take the time to learn those vocabulary words before reading that chapter for the week, I think they'll be fine.
And I also like those worldview analysis that are built into the Pilgrim's Progress Journal edition, because it does a great job at tackling some of those bigger issues that are in that older language and really explaining what we can pull from those things on that level.
Yes, and we adults need to read through the meaning of the vocabulary words to understand it as well. So.
And Pilgrim's Progress, it's so rich. And so, even adults can struggle with some of the concepts, but it's also, I think most students are able to get a lot out of it and have the discussions. Allow your student in that journal edition, they can write down their questions on the side. They can highlight, they can underline. There's, all sorts of tools that you can use to help guide your student through that Old English. And so, you can have discussions on the spot. You can have, talk about it ahead of time or afterwards or both. There's a lot of things built into the course already. Plus, you can come up with some other ideas to meet the needs of your particular student.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Heather says, I really appreciate all the resources you provide. Do you have any student work samples, especially essay examples that other students have written? As homeschoolers, I think that is one big disadvantage, that students do not get to see other students' work, to see other examples of exemplar work. Thanks. Okay, I would say, right now we don't have those samples. I think that's a great idea. But if you go into the app, you can join a group that is tailored, like you can join a high school group, and you can go in there and ask other families to post samples of their students' work. And I've seen that time and again. And I
yesterday
those samples. And so that's really where Masterbooks has that ability to go in and be able to have discussions. And I've seen parents go in and post something that they were concerned about with their student, and a lot of the parents coming back in and saying, no, actually that's really appropriate for their level. They did a really good job here, they did a really good job there. I would probably talk to them about this particular mistake, but their handwriting is completely consistent with what's normal. So you can get a lot of feedback that way, and you can also get people to share their students' work. And so I love that question. And while we don't have it right in the book, there is a solution that Masterbooks has provided, and I think it's fantastic. So go ahead, download that app, join the groups that apply to you, and go ahead and ask for families to share those samples and post some samples of your own students' work as well. Okay, so Stacy says, we are currently using Pilgrim's Progress and plan to use level 10 next year. How do you transition from these into dual enrollment smoothly?
All right, Stacy, I just had a son go through dual enrollment for 11th and 12th grade. And I'm going to tell you that he and I have had discussions about how much more he would have learned had he taken language lessons as opposed to his dual enrollment English courses. So in one sense, I'm grateful because his credits all transferred into Liberty University, and that was great. And we don't regret doing the dual enrollment. However, I would say be prepared for sort of a drop in instruction, because they're not going to get grammar instruction in those classes. It's going to be writing assignments, which is great, but there's definitely a drop off in the amount of work that would be done and the amount of exposure to different types of the elements of language arts. I think the transition will be completely smooth if you go from 10th level 10 into if your student's going to do dual enrollment for 11th and 12th. They are completely 100% prepared for that. I'm confident in that, having my son just go through that.
And one thing that I'd like to mention is you cover citation. So you don't go through every single bit, every single style. The professor's going to take care of those details in the courses that they enroll in, but you do familiarize the student with the concept and how to do it. And so I think that that's probably one of the most important things that can be done if a student is transitioning into a dual enrollment course.
Absolutely.
Okay, Ingrid says, how do you recommend choosing outside literature for your high schooler to read? That one's a tough one to answer because all families and all students are so different. And so maybe Sarah and I can share how we do it. I'll start. In my family, I have a bookshelf that's full of all sorts of books, all sorts of levels, all sorts of interests. I would say some of the books are what I would consider to be candy. They're joke books or funny stuff. They're not the hard-hitting novels, but I also have those hard-hitting novels and the classics. They're all on my bookshelf. And what I like to do is I like to discuss with my student our plan for the year. I prefer to utilize my own bookshelf versus just sending my kid off to the library. When I utilize the library, I guide that process because the library just has so much there that's not appropriate. So you have to use caution. But I like to include a mix of books that would be beneath my students' level. I'm okay with one or two of those making the list. I utilize the Masterbooks book list in the back of the book, and I create my list before the school year starts, except for this year. We haven't gotten to that yet. I still need to do that on my to-do list. And then they can mark it off as they read each book or add a book that maybe wasn't on the list, but midway through they just have an interest. And so that's how we handle it in our family. Sometimes we'll have a theme, like we might just focus on, say, American history. But often we don't. It just depends on the year. It depends on the student. So go ahead, Sarah. How does your family do it?
Yeah, I start first with what are their interests? What type of stories do they like to read? Like, I want them to enjoy this reading. They have enough, of textbook reading and educational type reading. So for their books that I pick every year, it's definitely geared toward their interest. Another idea is a lot of homeschool families are involved in some sort of homeschool co-op, or you have other friends who homeschool, and we share book ideas with each other. Because I don't have time to vet all of these books, but yet I have a huge homeschool community around me. And we say, yeah, this was an awesome book. Like, so if it's somebody that that you are like-minded and their standards for books are similar to yours, that's one way to do it, is just to ask friends.
Yeah, I like that idea. And, I'm at the point in life where I did all that with my older set. And so then I have this whole library for my younger
kind of where
set.
I'm at too.
Yeah. Okay. So Michelle says, will masterbooks consider creating a supplement or practice makes perfect with instruction on diagramming sentences? Many visual learners benefit from diagramming sentences. It helped me greatly with grammar and sentence structure. So I will take that one. So as far as a practice makes perfect goes, that is something that we have been going back and forth with masterbooks for a while now. I personally would like to see a practice makes perfect, but if that does not come to fruition, then I may incorporate some things into things that you could download and use into the academy courses. So next on my list is to start to develop those academy courses, which will also involve some discussions with masterbooks about practice makes perfect and what we do with that. As far as diagramming goes, I am not touching diagramming with a 10-foot pole personally. That does not mean that we won't be able to cajole Sarah into writing such a resource. So that's actually on our list of things that we would like to see done for those students that love diagramming. I have a son that viewed them like a puzzle and he loved it and it worked for him. For me, my mind doesn't work that way. And while I could write a book that taught diagramming, I wouldn't have any fun. It would be drudgery and misery for me. And so I don't want to be the one that writes it, because I like to write things that are fun and that I'm enjoying. And
I might have fun writing that.
Exactly. And that brings us back to what we said earlier about God makes us all different. We're all unique. And where this is not my thing, Sarah would have a blast doing that. And so it's definitely within discussion. We just haven't crossed that threshold yet to tackle it. Sarah has to get through levels 11 and 12. I'm still supervising the process. I get to see everything, give insights. Sarah is completely using my approach and the language lesson structure. So it's all going to be very, very similar to what you've already seen, but she's also going to be extra busy. And I will start working on those academy courses. So if we don't plan to do the Practice Makes Perfect books, then look for some of those downloadables in the academy courses as they come out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Erin says, advice how to navigate and tweak the curriculum for those with severe dyslexia, how to alter some of the reading and writing and still do the amount of work and quality of work needed for high school credit. I have language lessons level 10 specifically.
Yeah, honestly, I'm not super familiar with dyslexia. I feel like probably anything I would offer you've already thought of, which would be, use of audiobooks, tweaking assignments to fit your student better, not feeling the pressure of doing everything in those assignments, and not to be concerned that your student won't be ready or prepared just because they haven't done everything on the page. To give yourself that grace. Kristen, I don't know if you have any ideas, if you've...
We're actually facing this with one of my grandsons. And I also think that one of my older sons probably was undiagnosed. with dyslexia. He just didn't present in the traditional way. But as we're learning about it with my grandson, we're realizing, oh, there's a possibility, but it's kind of too late to do much with him at this point. On a educational level, into adulthood, he can certainly benefit for some tips. But what I would say is go into the app. There is a special needs section, and they will not help you with diagnosing in any way, but they can offer tips of what worked for their student. And what I'm finding with dyslexia students or students with dyslexia, there is no one size fits all. They're still individual. So it's really good for different parents to share what has worked, and then you try some things and see what works for your student. Because I have found that language lessons has been a great fit for a lot of students with dyslexia, but it's not a perfect fit for all students with dyslexia. And so there is no one size fits all, even when you're dealing with somebody, with a population that all struggle with the same sort of thing like dyslexia. And so you really need to try some things, but I highly recommend the Masterbooks app and joining that group and throwing that question out there to them. Okay, let me see where we are. Christy says, so much thought, care, expertise, experience, and prayer is written into these courses with a heart. Aw, thank you, Christy. We appreciate it. It has been a labor of love, and I think Sarah would agree with that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Shannon says, hello. My question is about writing also. My son has never loved writing, just started using level 8. I'm having a hard time getting him to spend time and plan before he writes. When he does his writing, it usually is pretty good. But when he doesn't, it's like pulling teeth. I'll guide him, as will his dad, and eventually the writing will be really great. Any tips to encourage him to plan ahead so his thoughts are organized and we don't need to go through so many drafts? Might have gotten cut off there. Yeah, I have to say I was not one that really loved rewriting multiple drafts. And you may just not have found the right pre-writing tool. So I'm going to let Sarah jump in and talk, follow up, but I do want to share a little bit about the difference between the way I write and Randy. So Randy loves, he could tell you what they're called. I don't even know, but they're the little charts that you start with your main idea, and then you have all these ideas that are all out here, a mind map, I think. Mm-hmm. Those look so disorganized, and it makes my head explode looking at those. He loves them. And so, play with some different styles. To me, I like the classic, here's your topic, here's your supporting topics, turn them into sentences, that sort of thing. I like it much more structured, where Randy, he just boom, throw it all out there and then use that to bring organization to it. So I would really encourage you to bring him into the process to find some things that he might like. And if he doesn't like any of them and just resists, then you just have to tell him, listen, here's the thing. If you don't spend time preparing, you're going to spend time rewriting. And then I would focus on a top couple of things that when he's rewriting that you focus on at a time. So let's say punctuation. They're just not putting periods and question marks at the ends of their sentences. Hone in on that until they start doing that regularly and consistently. And then focus on maybe their sentence structure, and then focus on that for a while until you've kind of honed that in. My oldest, Carrie, high school, she got where she just shut down if I offered any suggestions. So I just got where I just made sure she completed the assignment and said, okay.
We need some of her essays to go over, figuring she'd hear it from me.
Yeah. Yep. And then you know what? She went off to college and her professors are like, wow, you're a fantastic writer. And I'm like, why didn't you do that for me? So it's not the end of the world if they're not putting everything into it. Life has a way when they're writing for the right audience. of getting more of that effort. But there are some things that you can do to help encourage that. So I'm going to go ahead and let Sarah give a few tips.
Yeah, I would say really, making sure that he does an outline beforehand, before he writes an essay. But also, I would keep it to have him write the rough draft, and you can correct that, and have him do a final copy. And if there's still some mistakes in the final copy, I would let it go. You've got all of high school that he's going to be working on writing and refining that skill. And my concern always is sort of taking the joy out of writing. It's really about him getting his thoughts out onto the page. And if he's got great thoughts and a logical progression of his thoughts, or he's told a wonderful story, we can really take the fun out of that by finding every little quotation mark that is inside the punctuation. And I would a rough draft and a final draft, and let that be what it is. You have time. And the other thing is that we need to realize as homeschool parents is that they don't need to know absolutely everything and have perfected writing by the time they graduate. Right. They're going to learn in college as well. And I can guarantee you they're probably going to already be ahead of most of their peers in college because of the education you've given them, because they've gone through the language lessons series. So I would take a deep breath and let those little mistakes go, and just be able to have the writing experience be a little bit more enjoyable.
And I would also say that even if your student doesn't go on to college, if they need to write an email and they're not sure about something, my kids come back and ask. Mm-hmm. So, or they can, do a search. I have the rest of the comment that got cut off here. So you said the more you addressed it, the more drafts we do, the more frustrating it gets for all of us. So I like that too, just the two. She says, I know we have a year, but this will be a problem will this be a problem going into level 9 in terms of the amount of writing? And, there are writing, but it's a slow buildup. And I think we do a pretty good job at walking them through that. And so you can always change up the assignments. You can skip some. You can do what's appropriate for your student. It's okay to do that. Okay, so Connie says, what is your suggestion for making the 5-day week schedule fit into a 4-day week schedule? So we get people that change out that all the time. And what I usually suggest is in that schedule, you just change up the due dates. You schedule your target dates out. So you might have to double up on a day, or you might say, okay, on days 3 and 4, you're going to have to get 3, 4, and 5 done, something like that. Or you could take parts of it and switch it around. You could do, say, parts of the review on different days. You could do each section right after they finish that day's work, because it is broken down into sections. So there's a lot of creative ways that you can do that. Sarah, would you add to that?
Yeah, I would. I would take, and every student's different. So I would find the 2 days that your student tends to get through the quickest and combine those two. For my students, it's day 1 and day 2. They tend to be able to get through the special feature and the vocabulary and writing their scripture verse and the grammar lesson. Where day 3, that's where they're going to be doing maybe some heftier writing, starting their essay project. Day 4 as well. There's a decent amount of reading for literary analysis. So combining those 2 days might be a little bit too much, but maybe you've got a kid who that's their thing and they don't mind doing both of those the same day. For my kids, it's day 1 and 2 if we combine.
Okay, that's awesome. And I would also ask in the Masterbooks app as well, because you might get a lot of other ideas of families who do that regularly. We're going to answer another question or two, and then we'll be out of time. So Michelle says, for older students, if we choose not to utilize some of the classics for them due to content or moral reasons, how do we prepare them when they may encounter those books in college? I'm going to start and then turn it over to Sarah. I would say, I think summaries are great. And I think, just summarizing what's in it, letting your student familiarize themselves with what the book is about and sharing your concerns and why this isn't something that's appropriate. And then if they do encounter in college, preparing them, this is what you're going to get. This is a biblical worldview and why we're not going to read it right now. If they're required at least to read it in college, which hopefully they aren't, at least they have a familiarity and a starting point to say, this is how this book goes against a biblical worldview. And that's also why we focus so much on recognizing a biblical worldview versus a non-biblical worldview, things to look for. We incorporate even subtle things that you may not think is preparing the student. So one of the levels that Sarah's working on right now is level 11, and we're working on icons that help train the student to identify the type of work that it is. Because when you're looking at something that's fiction versus nonfiction, you're going to approach that a little bit differently. So we want students to be able to have a literary analysis framework to guide them in all of life, no matter what they're reading. And so that's our goal in the high school levels, is to train students to think in that way. So just by using language lessons, students are going to automatically have that mindset. But then I think it is important for us as parents to point out those things. Would you add anything, Sarah?
Yeah, I would say that exposing them to some literature that has some things in it that maybe aren't biblically appropriate, where you can be there as the parent to have that discussion and say, why was this person's behavior in this novel inappropriate? How was it unchristlike? I would rather have my students encounter those things while they're still my student, and I can discuss it with them to just help to prepare them a little bit. This isn't that we're going to give them all sorts of things to read that are not appropriate. That's not what I mean. But just a couple of little samples of things that could spark some discussion. And of course, to let them know, hey, when you're in college, if your professor asks you to read a book and there's something questionable in it, come to me, let's have a conversation. If they're used to talking to us about worldview and the music they listen to, the things they see on TV, what they're seeing on the internet, what they're reading in books, if we can constantly have that dialogue going, that's really going to help our students, because they are going to end up in a world where these things exist. They're everywhere. And we can't completely shelter them from it. So how do we prepare them for that? And it's through having discussion and always taking God's word as our flashlight to see the truth. So I actually had a course in college where I went to the professor in tears because he had given books out to read that I did not feel were appropriate for me to read. And because I was one of his better students, he actually adjusted the college course for me and gave me my own books to read. So that can happen. And it was really hard for me to stand up and say, I'm not going to read this, scared I'm going to be dropped from the course, but he made that accommodation for me.
That's neat. Yeah. And I think 11th and 12th grade is the right level to start having those discussions and start, talking about that. We need to wrap this up, but there's one quick question that we can cover, and then we will close out and say goodbye for now, but we will see everybody in the app. Okay, so Connie says, if we are just switching to this English in 9th grade and the student hasn't done any writing, would you start with 9th grade or 8th grade? I'm going to throw that over to you, Sarah.
I would absolutely start in level 8. My 11th grader is doing level 10 right now. It is not necessary for them to get all the way through level 12. If your student hasn't really had formal writing instruction, I think throwing them into level 9 might be a bit too much for them, where level 8, I think, would really bridge that gap and prepare them for the writing requirements of level 9. So that's where I'd start.
Yeah, and I'm going to concur with that. What I would do as they progress through the levels is, even if they only got through, say, level 10, what I would do in the high school level is just start pushing the envelope with some of their reading assignments and have some different discussions about what they're reading. That's how I would ramp up the levels. And then you're also going to expect a little bit more out of their writing.
Right.
So
Right.
the same assignment, but you're going to expect them to write those assignments at a higher level for an older student. So,
Yeah.
All right. Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining us for the seminar and the Q&A. I hope that it's been a blessing to all of you. And if you still have more questions, there's the Moms and Master Books on Facebook. The app is fantastic. That's where I really like to go in and hang out when I have a chance to. But with all that we've been producing, I haven't been able to be in there as much as I would like to. But there's such a great community there. And also make sure that you jump over and check out everything that's available on the Masterbooks Academy. We will be focusing more on the Language Lessons Academy courses here coming up. Level 1 is available. It's been available for a while, but we will be producing, hopefully, Academy courses all the way on up. And then there's also the masterbooks.com website. And so you want to go there, check out the previews, and check out everything that Masterbooks has to offer. It's all great. So you all just have a wonderful rest of the day. And again, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you.